Jace moved through the cold metal corridors of the alien vessel, his boots echoing softly against the floor. Overhead, flickering lights pulsed in shades of blue and purple, illuminating symbols etched in a language he couldn't read. He was the only human aboard, a lone figure among warriors, merchants, and silent watchers hidden in the shadows. He had come only to trade, spices, tech, nothing more. But Gorok, the alien leader, had other intentions. The towering creature stood waiting, skin armoured in hard scales that shimmered under the lights. His crimson eyes glowed like embers, and one clawed hand rested on the hilt of a blade forged from starbone. Behind him, guards stood motionless, their presence as heavy as stone. Gorak lifted a hand and spoke, his voice deep and resonant. "Human, you have served our cause well. Your technology has strengthened our fleet. I offer you a gift." Jace tensed. He knew alien customs. Gifts weren't always welcome things. Still he nodded carefully, hoping for something simple. A data crystal, a rare mineral, nothing that bled or breathed. But then, from behind the guards, something stepped forward, and Jace froze. It was a girl, young, her skin pale, traced with glowing violet lines along her arms. She looked fragile, frightened. Her feet were bare, and her clothes were little more than rags. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just stood there silent, her gaze fixed on the floor, like someone who had long forgotten how to hope. Gorak smiled. His teeth were sharp as broken glass. "She is yours. She will clean, cook, or warm your bed if you wish." Jace felt the whole room watching him, expecting him to nod, to take her as if she was an object. His heart pounded. Something inside him twisted, not with anger, but with sorrow. This girl was no gift. She was broken. He stepped forward slowly, and instead of taking her hand, he took off his jacket and gently placed it over her shoulders. The girl flinched, like she expected to be hit, not clothed. The fabric hung loosely around her small frame. "What is your name?" Jace asked, soft-like. The girl did not answer. She stared at the ground as if the question itself was forbidden. The room was silent. Warriors blinked, confused. This was not the reaction they expected. Gorak tilted his head. "Do you not like the gift?" The human turned to him, keeping his voice calm and steady. "She is not a gift. She is a person, and I do not own people." The alien crew whispered among themselves. Some laughed, others stared coldly. One even muttered, "Weak human." But Jace ignored them, turned back to the girl, gently placing a hand on her back. "Come with me." She followed like a shadow, still silent, but her steps were steady, her bare feet soft against the metal floor. They walked through the halls, passing other aliens. Some sneered, some looked away. Jace opened the door to his quarters and let her in. Small, but clean. A soft bed in the corner, shelves with books, and a glowing screen for messages. Jace showed her to the chair. "Sit if you like." Still, the girl did not speak. He moved to a drawer and pulled out a wrapped ration of food, something warm and simple. He placed it in front of her. She looked at it with wide, unsure eyes, like it might vanish if she reached out. "Go ahead," Jace said. She touched the food with shaking fingers, then took a small bite, then another. Soon the entire ration was gone. He handed her a cup of water. She sipped slowly, then looked up at him. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "Stay here as long as you want," Jace said. "You are safe." She looked at him, her eyes not angry or afraid, but lost, as if trying to remember what safety even meant. He pointed toward the bed. "Take it. I will sleep on the floor." She did not move for a while. Then slowly she walked to the edge of the bed and sat down, fingers gripping the soft cover. She looked back once more, and for a moment Jace thought he saw something flicker in her eyes. Not fear, not confusion, but the smallest piece of something broken, trying to rebuild. He turned away, giving her space. He did not know her story, did not know her pain. But he knew one thing. He would never treat her as less than human, even if she wasn't human at all. Outside, the ship continued to move through the stars, but inside that small room, for the first time in a long time, someone was no longer afraid to breathe. Its silence inside the room was soft, like a gentle hum floating in the air. The alien girl sat at the edge of the bed, unmoving still. Wrapped in Jace's jacket, her fingers touched the fabric carefully, as if it might vanish if she pressed too hard. Her eyes scanned the room slowly, not in fear, but in disbelief. It was warm, quiet, and clean. No chains, no shouting, no cold metal floor. She kept glancing toward the human man who had given her food and not taken anything in return. He sat near the screen, tapping gently, reading a glowing line of human text. His back turned to her, offering her something she had never known.
Privacy. He nodded, then stood slowly, trying not to startle her. He walked to the corner and pulled out a folded set of clothes, light and soft, with neutral colours. "Here," he said, placing them gently on the table. "You can wear these if you want." The girl looked at the clothes, but said nothing. Her lips parted just a little, then closed again. "There's a washroom in there," Jace continued, pointing to the small side chamber with a curtain and a sink. "I know you must want to feel clean. You can take your time." Still silent. The girl rose slowly, her steps quiet like a whisper across the floor. She clutched the jacket closer to her chest as she stepped into the washroom and pulled the curtain closed. Jace did not move. He sat back down and waited. He heard no sound at first, only silence, then the slow, soft splash of water as it began to run inside. The girl stared at herself in the mirror, the first mirror she had seen in years. Her reflection stared back. Hollow eyes, messy hair, bruises on her neck, small scars across her shoulders. Some faded, some new. She did not recognize the girl looking at her. The face was familiar, but the soul behind the eyes felt missing. She turned on the water and let it run over her hands. Warm, not scalding, not freezing, just right. She let the jacket fall carefully onto a nearby hook, then removed the dirty cloth that clung to her thin frame. She stepped into the stream of water. Her breath caught in her chest. The warmth spread over her skin like a soft memory she had long forgotten. She reached for the soft soap nearby, not the rough powder used by slavers, and gently began to wash her arms, her legs, her face. The dirt washed away. So did something else. She looked down and saw her own skin again. Not just grime or bruises, but the natural colour of who she used to be. Her fingers ran through her hair. She untangled it with care, each stroke like peeling away layers of fear and shame. Then, without warning, she stopped. Her breath shaky. A tear fell down her cheek. One single tear. Not from pain, not from fear, but from something deeper, something softer. She had not cried in years, had not allowed herself to. But here, in this small, quiet room with warm water and soft soap, she did. She dried herself with the towel placed neatly nearby, then reached for the clothes. Soft fabric, smooth to touch. She slipped them on piece by piece. Not rushed, not forced. They fit loosely but comfortably. The feeling of clean fabric against her skin was strange and yet comforting. She stepped out of the washroom. Jace looked up and froze. She looked different, her hair still damp but clean. Her face no longer hidden behind dirt, her posture still guarded but no longer collapsed. She clutched the edge of the shirt nervously, but stood straight. Her eyes met his for a moment before glancing away. "You look nice," he said simply. She blinked, unsure how to respond. But a small breath escaped her lips. It might have been almost a smile. Maybe not quite, but close. He stood and walked toward the bed, laying out a folded blanket. "If you ever want to talk, I am here," he said. "You do not have to." She sat slowly on the bed and pulled the blanket over her legs. The warmth from the bath still lingered in her body, but the warmth from his words stayed in her chest. She looked at him again, and for the first time her lips moved, trying to form a sound. But nothing came. He raised his hands slightly and said, "It is okay. Take your time. No rush. No pressure." Outside, the ship was still in motion. Lights flashing outside the window. Stars sliding past in long streaks of silver. But inside this room, time moved slower. Softly, Jace returned to his corner and sat down again, picking up a small device. He placed it on the table, and soft music began to play. Not loud, not fast, just a calm melody, the kind used on Earth to help children sleep. The girl leaned back slowly, letting her body relax. Her hand touched the soft blanket again, as if trying to make sure it was real. Her eyes grew heavier. The sound, the warmth, the safety. It was too much to resist. So for the first time in her memory, she closed her eyes and fell asleep without fear. But far outside the room, in the shadowed corners of the ship, whispers had already begun. Some did not like what they saw. Some called the human a fool. Others saw something else rising, something dangerous, not from weapons or war, but from something they had long forgotten. The hum of the alien ship echoed softly through the walls, a never-ending rhythm that filled every room with a distant presence, like the beginning of a story. Heart of some ancient beast, Jace sat in the dim glow of the corner light, watching the girl sleep, her breath steady, her hands curled gently against the blanket. She had not stirred in hours, and that in itself was a miracle for someone who had likely spent most nights shivering in fear or chained to cold floor. Stood quietly, careful not to wake her, and moved to the small shelf near the wall. He picked up a datapad and began reading reports from the trade he had just completed. Supplies exchanged, routes secured, everything clean, everything normal. But his eyes kept drifting back to her. Presence had changed something, not just in the room, but in him. She finally awoke. Her eyes opened slowly, blinking at the ceiling. Her body tensed for a moment, as if expecting pain or shouting, but none came. She sat up, the blanket sliding off her shoulders, and looked around, remembering where she was. Her fingers ran across the soft fabric. Her lips parted slightly as she saw Jace reading. She looked at him silently, smiled. "Good morning. How do you feel?" Did not answer. Not with words, but with a small nod. It was enough for no. Reached into a drawer and pulled out a container of healing salve, setting it gently on the table. "You have old scars. Maybe this can help." Looked down at her arms, at the faint white lines that crossed her skin like forgotten paths. Some were deep, some were thin, but all of them told stories. Stories of beatings, punishment, starvation, silence. She had never cared for them before, had never been allowed to. But now here was something meant not to harm, but to heal. Slowly, she reached out and touched the container. Her fingers brushed against Jace's for the briefest moment, and she pulled back, startled. But he did not move or react, just waited. took the salve into the washroom again, and for a long time she stared at her reflection. The mirror did not lie. The scars were real, each one like a memory pressed into her skin. She opened the salve and gently began rubbing it onto her arms. The coolness sank into her flesh and she closed her eyes. She traced the lines on her skin. Her mind drifted. She remembered flashes of the past, the chains, the auctions, the dark corridors of ships where she had no name, no voice, only a number. She remembered the faces of those who bought her, used her, and discarded her like trash. But she could not remember her home, not clearly. Just soft colours and the sound of wind. Maybe a tree, maybe a song sung by someone warm. When she stepped out of the washroom again, Jace looked up and smiled again. "Today I will teach you something, if you want," he said. She tilted her head, unsure what he means, pointed to a small screen on the wall, a touch panel with basic human letters. "I will teach you to write if you wish. Your name, your voice. It can start her, girl." Walked over slowly and looked at the screen. Jace tapped the first symbol. "This is A." She stared at it, then lifted her hand and touched the same letter, her fingers trembling slightly. Nodded. "Good, now B." He followed slowly, letter by letter. He showed her how to spell simple words: food, water, bed, light, each one like a tiny spark inside her mind. She traced the letters over and over until they started to make sense, handed her a small cloth notebook and a stylus. "Here, you can keep this. It is yours." Took it in both hands like it was some sacred treasure. Her eyes scanned the blank pages, and for a moment her breath caught. Again, Jace turned to make some food while she sat on the bed, notebook in hand. She opened to the first page and stared for a long while. Then slowly she wrote one word in small letters, the first word she had ever written. "Why?" Jace returned. He saw the word and sat beside her. "That is a good question," he stated. The girl looked up, and her voice came out raw and thin like dry air. But it came. "Why did you not take?" Jace looked at her and replied, "Because you are not something to take. You are someone to know." Her eyes filled again with that strange emotion. Not quite fear, not quite sadness. Something new, something she had not felt in so long. It almost... Ship continued its journey, but the room had changed again. Walls that once felt cold now held warmth. Voices once silent now searched for sound. But in the shadows of the ship, others were watching. Eyes that did not blink. Hearts that did not beat with compassion. They saw Jace as weak, the girl as a danger, and plans were already being whispered. Plans in dark corners, where kindness was feared more than worth. Air inside the ship had started to change. It was not just the temperature or the scent of recycled oxygen. It was something unspoken, something shifting, like the slow tightening of a rope around a tree. Jace noticed it. In the way the other crew members watched him more carefully now, their eyes lingering just a little longer, their voices falling silent when he passed, their footsteps pausing outside his door at night, too heavy to be simple. But inside his quarters, the atmosphere was different, softer, quieter. The girl now moved with a little more ease. Her steps were no longer as silent as shadows. Her posture no longer folded inward like a crushed flower. She would rise in the morning, bathe, and sometimes eat without needing to be asked. And when Jace taught her new words, she would nod or try tracing them into her notebook with a shaky hand. She still had not spoken, not a sound, not a whisper. Jace never forced her. He only waited patiently, like a gardener watching for a seed to rise on its own. One morning, Jace found her already awake, sitting by the panel, tracing letters on the screen. Her fingers formed the word light, then food, then safe. Jace smiled and sat beside her, pointing to another word. Name, he said gently. Do you have one? Froze. The stylus in her hand stopped. Her eyes wide, as if that word had opened something locked for too long. She hesitated, then slowly lifted the stylus and wrote 4 letters. Said it softly, letting the name hang in the air like a gift. Thank you for telling. Milarashi looked away, but her fingers gripped the notebook tighter. Her lips moved once, as if testing the sound, but no word came. Later that day, Jace took her to the ship's observation window, where stars poured endlessly across the black sky. She stared at them in silence, her eyes reflecting the starlight like glass. Jace spoke quietly. This is what freedom looks like. Endless direction. No one can stop where you go unless you let them. She turned to him, lips parting again, breath catching in her throat. And then a single word escaped. Why? Jace turned slowly, his expression calm and gentle. He had been waiting for this moment. Not rushing it, not pushing it. Just waiting. Because you deserve to speak, he said. You deserve to ask why. And you deserve the answers. Looked at him, searching his face for a lie, but found none. Her throat ached with the sound, her heart beating faster. She had spoken her first word to the one person who never asked her to. Next day, things changed more quickly. The crew had noticed LRA walking beside Jace, her body cleaner, her clothes fresh, her eyes not hollow. They whispered among themselves, saying the human was breaking protocol, treating a slave as family. Jace ignored them, but LRA heard every word, and she understood more than they thought. One alien passed too close and hissed, "You should be back in chains, not walking like you belong." LRA flinched, but Jace stepped between them without hesitation. He looked the alien in the eyes and said, "Back off." Later, Jace returned to their quarters, holding a small metal box. Inside were woven bracelets from his home, each one made by hand with patterns of his village. He gave one to LRA and tied it gently to her wrist. "This means belonging," he said. She stared at it in wonder, her fingers running over the threads. She held her wrist close like it was made of crystal. That night, she wrote more in her notebook. She wrote free. She wrote Jace. She wrote safe. And then she wrote the word trust in shaky, uneven letters. While she slept, Jace received a message on his datapad, anonymous but clear. "Stop, or we will stop you." He stared at it for a long time, then deleted it and locked his door. The next morning, LRA noticed something different about him. Heaviness in his eyes. But he smiled just the same and said, "Ready for more letters today?" She nodded, and for the first time, she spoke 2 words. "Thank you." Outside the room, behind walls and doors and steel holes, voices gathered. Not all of them pleased, not all of them patient. For there were those who saw LRA not as a girl with a name, but a weapon or a problem, or a shameful reminder of past sins. They would not remain silent much longer. The silence that once protected LRA had become too loud. It drew eyes. It stirred whispers in the cold metal corners of the alien ship, where kindness was seen as weakness, and obedience was law. The crew had been watching for days, but now they started speaking, their voices low, their faces twisted with confusion and quiet anger. Some mocked her openly, others stared, as if waiting for her to fall, waiting for the human to give up and return her to the chains she once wore. But LRA had changed. Her steps now carried more purpose. Her back no longer hunched, her eyes no longer hiding. She spoke in short words when needed, and her hands no longer trembled when she reached for food or sat beside Jace. She wore the bracelet he gave her every day, never taking it off. It became a symbol to her, something more than decoration. It was proof that she was not invisible. In the afternoon, she walked through the mess hall with Jace beside her. The room fell quiet for a moment as they entered. LRA kept her gaze forward, but she could feel it, the weight of their judgment, the heat of their stares. An alien soldier with grey skin and sharp tusks leaned toward his companion and said, loud enough for her to hear, "He must be keeping her for soft company, the kind that does not fight back." Jace stopped, his body still as stone. He turned slowly and looked at the soldier. "What did you say?" The soldier grinned, a cruel smile. "You heard me, human. We all know what she really is. How long before you break her, like the rest before?" Before Jace could speak, LRA stepped forward, her voice sharp and clear. "I am not a thing." The room went completely still. Her voice, not loud but strong, cut through the air like a blade. Jace looked at her, eyes wide. The soldier laughed once and stood. "You dare speak, slave!" But Jace moved between them fast, placing himself in front of LRA. He said, "You speak to her again like that, and you answer to me, alien." The soldier stepped back, surprised not by the words, but by the fact that a human had dared to challenge him over someone so low in their eyes. He spat on the floor and walked away, muttering, but he did not return to finish his insult. LRA stared at Jace, her hands shaking, not from fear, but from something else, something wild and strange that bloomed inside her chest. She had spoken. She had defended herself, and Jace had not stopped her. He had stood with her. Later, in their quarters, Jace sat near the wall, holding a cloth to his side, where the alien had elbowed him as he passed. It was not serious, but enough to bruise. LRA sat beside him, her fingers slowly reaching for the cloth. "Let me," she whispered. "Let me take it." Her hands soft but steady, pressing the cool fabric against his side. "You should not protect me," she said. "I bring danger to you." Jace looked at her and smiled. "You do not bring danger. They bring it because they fear what they cannot control." She looked down at the cloth, watching it soak with the faint stain of blood. "You are not like them," Jace said, "and that is why they do not understand." LRA wrote more that night, pages filled with thoughts and questions. She wrote about the stars she had seen, the words Jace had taught her, and dreams she did not yet know how to speak in. Outside, beyond their door, the alien soldier who had insulted her stood with others, whispering, their voices low. They spoke of rebellion, of disgrace, of bloodlines that must remain hidden. They spoke of her as if she were a threat, as if kindness had become a weapon more dangerous than fire. And deep in the ship, an old record was activated. A search through the archives, a scan of her face, a match found, a secret no one expected to return. A bloodline not that of a slave, but of nobility. Long thought dead, hidden by betrayal, sold by those who feared her return to them. She was not a girl. She was a Keith. The ship moved through the endless dark of space, lights blinking across the metal hull, engines humming like a distant storm. But inside, the silence had grown heavier. Jace felt it in the way the corridors stretched too long, in the way crew members passed him without a word, in the way shadows lingered near corners where no one should stand, and always in the way they looked at LRA, not with pity now, not even with disgust, but with something deeper, something unnamed. Jace did not speak of it to her, but he noticed how they whispered when she walked by, how they stared at her wrist, where the woven bracelet still rested, proud and soft against her skin. And though he tried to shield her from the shift, he knew that something was coming. It came late at night, when they were both inside their quarters, and the door chimed without warning. Jace opened it cautiously and found an alien officer outside, not one he trusted fully, but one he had traded with before. The officer said nothing, just handed him a data slate and turned away, leaving without a sound. Jace closed the door and opened the slate. The screen flickered and then displayed a single image. It was LRA, but not as she was now. She looked younger, maybe 5 or 6, her eyes wide and filled with light, her face cleaner, her hair brushed and styled, and behind her stood 2 tall figures cloaked in royal armour. Jace's eyes scanned the text below, and the breath left his lungs. The data was from the highborn archives of the alien system, lost and locked for decades. It spoke of a noble family betrayed during a silent coup, their daughter taken, vanished, and presumed dead. But not dead. Jace turned slowly and looked at LRA. She sat cross-legged on the bed, writing in her notebook, her head tilted slightly when she saw his face. She stood. "What is it?" she asked. He walked over and handed her the slate. She read the words slowly and then stopped, her body frozen, her hands trembling, her breath catching in her chest. "No," she whispered. "This is not me." But it was. The markings on her shoulder, the birthmark near her wrist, the name hidden beneath the name LRA. They matched everything. She dropped the slate and backed away as if it burned her, her voice breaking. "I am not that girl. I am nothing. I am no one." Jace stepped forward and gently held her arms. "You are someone. You have always been someone." But she shook her head. "They will come for me." And she was right. Within hours, the door to their quarters was overridden by force. Jace stood in front of her as the guards entered, led by the same officer who had brought the slate. "You have been hiding royalty," he said, his voice flat. "Do you understand the punishment for this crime?" "It is not hiding," Jace said. "She did not know the—" The officer ignored him. "She is the last of the High Line. Her blood is a threat to the Council. If others know she lives, rebellions will rise. Fear her," Jace said, "because she reminds you of the truth." The officer barked. "We are taking her." "I know," Jace said. Lura turned to her shocked, but she stepped forward, her chin high, her shoulders straight. "If I run, they will never stop. If I hide, you will suffer. If I face them, maybe the truth will break what they built." He wanted to argue, to fight, to stop it all, but her eyes were no longer those of a slave. They were fire and wind and steel. She turned to him slowly and said something that would never leave his heart. "Thank you for giving me back my voice." Then they took her, dragged her down the halls, past the crew who now watched in silence, some shocked, some guilty, none brave enough to stop. He stood in the doorway, watching her disappear around the corner, his hands clenched, his chest hollow. But inside him, something began to rise. Something not just anger, not just sorrow, but purpose. Because she had spoken, and they had feared it. The chamber was built to intimidate. High walls made of black alloy, guards lining the edges, cold lights flickering down from above. And at the centre, a platform where Lura stood, her hands unbound, her face calm, but her heart racing. She looked at the crowd gathered before her. Alien commanders, nobles, soldiers, and traders, all summoned to witness her fate. Some looked at her with disgust, others with fear, but none with mercy. The officer who had dragged her in spoke first, listing her bloodline, her hidden identity, her so-called crimes. He called her a threat to the peace, a spark to rebellion. He demanded her silence, demanded her exile or execution to ensure stability for the empire. She said nothing until he turned to her and demanded a confession. She looked at him, then at the crowd, then lifted her hand slowly and touched the bracelet still on her wrist. And then she spoke, not in fear, not in anger, but with quiet truth. I was born to a name I never knew, raised without one, and given a number to replace it. I was traded like a thing, forgotten like dust. But a human gave me clothes, not chains, gave me words, not commands, gave me choice, not fear. He did not treat me like property, he treated me like a person. The chamber murmured, voices rising in disbelief. The officer barked, "Silence!" But Laura stepped forward, her voice louder now. "You fear me not because I am noble, not because of my blood, but because I remember. I remember what it feels like to be treated with kindness, and I will not forget, and I will not allow you to erase me." A shift turned her head slowly, and for a moment time stopped. Jace stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 guards who had let him pass the moment they saw him. His face bruised, his shirt torn from a struggle earlier, but his eyes locked on hers, and he nodded once. The officer pointed. "Remove him now. He is no longer welcome." Laura raised her hand again. "Stop," she said. "He has every right to stand here beside me." "Are you to give orders here?" the officer sneered. "I am the last of the High Line," Laura said, her voice like steel. "And I claim my right to speak, to stand, and to decide my own path." The silence that followed was thick, heavy, but no one moved. And then, slowly, from the back, one of the elder nobles stepped forward, his face lined with age and his voice calm. "I remember her mother. She too stood proud. She too defied this court." He bowed his head. Slowly, 2 others followed, then more, one by one. Not all, but enough to shift the weight of the room. The officer stepped back, his mouth tight with fury, but he could feel the tide turning. Laura looked toward Jace and gestured, "Come." He walked slowly past the guards, past the officers, past the ones who had doubted, and stood beside her. She took his hand in hers and held it in the open. Not hidden, not afraid. "A human gave me back my voice," she said. "And now, with that voice, I say this. I will not run. I will not be silent. And I will not be owned, ever." The chamber erupted, some in protest, some in support. But the law had been spoken. A member of the High Line had declared her will, and by their own code, it could not be undone. That night the halls of the ship echoed, not with chains, but with footsteps of change. Laura returned to her quarters, not as a slave, not as a fugitive, but as herself. Fully, finally. Jace stood at the window, watching the stars, and Laura stood beside him, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. They said nothing for a long while, just breathed the same air, shared the same silence, and far across the stars, where others still waited in darkness, a signal was sent. A light reborn, a name once lost, now spoken again. Loranet, a gift, not a number, not a shaded name. A name that now meant freedom,